elder abuse is not exactly a chuckle.
It's not a chuckle, but what I loved, without trying to give this away, is that in fact, in that parallel story, you turned the whole thing on its head, and I think that people who get to the end, you know, are really, I just love that.
Thank you. Well, again, I was so desperate when I finally started working on T, the story that I ended up with, that I thought to myself, if I go get that B story from R's for Ricochet, I can pump my page count up. So I'm folding it in again, all the stuff I'd stripped out of that book, and my shadow side, which is how I operate, the old Jungian shadow, said to me, I suppose you don't understand yet why we did that. And I went, no, I don't. And she said to me, pedophilia, which is yet another cheery theme in this book, and elder abuse are on the same continuum. It is the predator taking advantage of the innocent, the very old, the very young, and the innocent of any age. So those two stories, while they don't appear to be connected, are truly the same phenomenon.
Well, they are, but what also is interesting, I think, is one of these is a deliberate, long-lived predatory situation, and the other is totally a crime of opportunity.
Yes.
And I thought that that made a really nice contrast, too, that, you know, because impulse oftentimes is what, you know, dictates life. I mean, it doesn't necessarily, you know, the psychopath who is like that. It's somebody who says, oh, look. And then he has to live with the consequences.
And that's hard to pull off in a mystery novel because, in truth, a genuine, real homicide in this world is impulse, it's rage, it's alcohol-related. It's hard to make that play in a book. It is better to have somebody like Solana Rojas, who has a scheme in mind, who has worked out very careful techniques for taking advantage of people. And that, in a way, is a better method of building a story. But the pedophile operates by opportunity, as you say, taking advantage of the innocent in small moments.
Absolutely. But, yeah, I mean, in real life, the reason most people are caught is because it is impulse or rage or something.
And they're not as smart as they think they are, you know.
Well, they're not smart at all most of the time. They're gripped in some... I'll be very interested to see if this Chicago Police Department guy, former cop, and missing wife, number 3, whether that ever resolves into something anybody can know, or whether that's one without the habeas corpus and all we'll never figure out. And that brings me to a question I wanted to ask you about Q is for Corey. I see that you've added something to SueGrafton.com, your website, dealing with the fact that Jane Doe is still not known. But, you know, some of your stories come to you from, maybe all of them do, from real life situations.
Usually not. That, in fact, is the only story where I borrowed heavily from reality. I was sitting at a dinner party with the forensic pathologist who handled that homicide in 1969, and I must have come up with the title Quarry, and he said, oh, you know, there was a body found up in Lompoc in the quarry up there in 1969. He said, we've never identified this young girl. And he said it seemed odd to him because she had very unusual teeth, you know, and he thought the minute she was, you know, described in a newspaper article, somebody would go, I know who that is. So then he said to me, well, of course, you know, we still have the jaw. Would you like to see it? And I went, oh, yes, I would. So the sheriff's department, God bless them, opened their files to me. And I leaned heavily on actual investigative reports from that file. They were totally cooperative.
And even the book, even The Success of Q, has not produced then somebody who says...
That's right. Because in the end, I paid to have that body exhumed. I paid to have her facial characteristics reproduced and photographed in hopes that somebody would spot her and say, you know, I know. That hasn't happened yet, but it's only going to take one person.
That's true.
You know, it only takes one.
You just have to hope that the one person hasn't predecessed the publication of Q, which of course is certainly possible with something that happened that far back. One of the things that I've enjoyed in the books is Kinsey herself, but you have been pretty careful about how much personal stuff to Kinsey. I think didn't it sort of peak in, was it M or N, or maybe both of them together? There was a lot about Kinsey's own life.
Yes. Well, I introduced in J is for Judgment her family.
Right.
She's in the course of an investigation, somebody says, I know who you are. I know your family.
Right.
She's going, what family? So she gets into investigating herself, among other things. Now, my readers are divided just about 50-50 on that. Half of them go, I just love knowing about her family. Others are going, skip that part. That is so boring. So I am very judicious about laying that in, and I believe you'll see some of that in You, whatever title I come up with.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions, is because it was in J, and then in M, I think there was quite a lot of it.
Yes.
And then in N, isn't that the one where you go back in time and it's Kinsey's first marriage, or is that O?
That was O is for
It
Outlaw.
was O, okay. So, you know, you did explore not her family necessarily,
but her own marital
marriage.
history, yeah.
Right, and so as you've got 6 books left to work with, I guess the question is, how much about Kinsey do you want readers to know by the time you get to Z?
I feel honor-bound to resolve that issue of her family, and I think I'm going to do it in You. I just think it's time to bring that back to the fore, and I'll play it in parallel with something else. It's not just a book about family, because I write mystery novels. I write whodunits in the main. So I will work to resolve that. I just think readers need to know how that turns out.
I do too. That was one of the reasons I asked, but I didn't know if you were going to do it kind of piecemeal through the last books.
I have done some piecemeal, and now I think, oh, come on, let's just tackle it head on and see where that goes. For many years, I avoided the family conflict because I didn't know how it was going to play out. And in truth, our family conflicts don't often have tidy resolutions, you know. Feuds drag on forever. But I can now see the beats, the steps by which that works itself to a conclusion. So
your shadow's probably been up there perking along going, okay, it's going to be, well, I mean, I do think the writer's subconscious is just a wonderful thing, and so many writers all kind of seem surprised, you know, by what comes out, but I really think that if you're a writer, there's that part of your mind that's always just percolating.
That's right. That's our dark side, you know.
I don't know if it's always a dark side. I think maybe it's just wrestling with bits of a story.
Yeah.
And sometimes people, one of the things I dislike about books, first books are often so much about setup. Laurie King, whom you may know, once said to me when I revealed inadvertently, in fact, on this program, and I could have shot myself, accidentally blurted out.
She might have shot you, too.
Well, you know, she's a real lady, because there was a moment when she could have killed me, but I revealed that one of my 2 major book-selling mistakes was to return all the copies of her first book, because I hadn't really liked it, and then, of course, you know, what could I say? And she was so kind to me, and she said, you know, you were probably bored, because first novels are often so much about setup.
Yeah.
But even though she was being kind, she was also right. I've been doing this, reading crime, for 55 years. There's hardly anything I haven't read.
Yes.
And I am bored by setup, and the more labored it is, the more I'm bored. And a lot of writers today, thinking about series as commercial vehicles and all, go to so much trouble, you know, to put all this
no, you do just the opposite.
Well,
you parcel it out bit by bit so that the story doesn't come to a screeching halt while you fill in the blanks. So I, in my own way, was clever enough to hold back. You know, I know far more than I'm telling, and by the same token, there are many things I discover in the moment. For instance, I think it's the end of F is for Fugitive. I needed a way to button that up, and so I thought that book turned out to be a book about fathers. It is just a book about fathers. And so I realized I'm in the back 2 pages, and up came this image of that accident wherein Kinsey's parents are killed when she's 5 years old. And I understood her last emotional connection with her father. I had never known that before. I had never seen that image, and up it popped. So some of this, it comes out of the subconscious. It is there somewhere.
Do you know, this is so scary. That's the F book for father, and the M book had mother.
Yeah,
and that's so interesting. So well, we'll have to think, understanding?
Yes.
No, really. I mean, I think that is kind of intriguing. I hadn't thought about that, but you're absolutely right. But, you know, the A book, if I remember, you and I have talked about this, was fueled in part, or at least some of the book had to do with the fact that you just as soon bump off one of your former husbands.
Yes.